Today, the build-to-rent solution won't solve the real problem. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, one latest post covering finance and property news. Well, part 2 of the government's stalled housing legislation finally passed federal parliament on Thursday. The build-to-rent tax reform bill aims to boost investment in apartment blocks designed and constructed for rental occupancy and retained in single ownership. The Conversation had a very good article on this, and I'm using some of that in this show tonight. Other than as purpose-built student accommodation, this form of development remains rare in Australia. Instead, our private rental market continues to be dominated by small-scale mum-and-dad investors. Only since around 2017 have build-to-rent projects begun to appear in some Australian capital cities. By the middle of 2024, just around 5,000 units had been completed, with around 11,000 more under construction. Australian governments now see expanding this form of housing as appealing in the long term. That might bring Australia more in line with countries such as the US and Canada, where large-scale institutional investment in rental housing is long established. Under the new bill, the 30% withholding tax rate for foreign funders of residential build-to-rent developments is equalised with that for commercial and industrial property at 15%. And at the same time, the build-to-rent capital works tax deduction rate is increased from 2.5% to 4%. This allows expenses to be depreciated for tax over a 25-year span rather than 40 years at present. And that brings the build-to-rent into line with the Australian Tax Office's treatment of service departments, making projects more viable. In attempting to step up build-to-rent development, high significance is attached to enabling overseas investment. Because they already invest at scale in build-to-rent development in other countries, many large international players are already familiar with this type of development. Pension funds, insurance companies, and sovereign wealth funds are attracted by its low risk and reliable returns. Now, as argued in a recent official report, build-to-rent housing could help fulfill several significant housing policy objectives. First, when developers can diversify away from solely focusing on building to sell, there could be an overall increase in housing supply. Second, homes are likely to be more secure for tenants. This is because the prime motivation of build-to-rent investors is often long-term rental income. Small landlords, on the other hand, are usually motivated by capital gains that can be realised only through sale. Third, multi-unit buildings commissioned to be kept by a single owner should incentivise utility, durability and energy efficiency in design and construction. And finally, build-to-rent could be relatively resistant to housing market downturns. That benefits both the development industry and the national economy. But frankly, it's not all that simple. At the same time, build-to-rent does not inherently contribute to affordable housing. At least in its initial form in Australia, it is typically a premium product, mainly in well-connected locations and targeted at moderate to high income earners. In early 2024, for example, two-bedroom apartments were advertised in Sydney and Melbourne at weekly rents in the $800 to $950 range, according to surveys taken at the time. But eligibility for the new and lower rate of withholding tax offered in the build-to-rent bill is conditional on a proportion of apartments in qualifying projects being made available at, quote, affordable prices. That is, a rent discounted from the market rate. While appealing in principle, the detailed proposals sparked controversy around the proposed definition of affordable housing, the projects that would be covered, and the way that designated affordable units would be managed. As amended in the Senate, qualifying developments will need to include 10% affordable tenancies, with rents set at 74.9% of market value, or no more than 30% of household income, whichever is the lower. Affordable units, including a minimum proportion rented to low-income earners, will be managed by community housing providers for at least 15 years. Given the Property Council's estimate that the new framework could yield a total of around 80,000 build-to-rent apartments over the next decade, this could generate 8,000 good quality units affordable to moderate income earners. And the government also agreed to the retrospective application of the new tax regime for projects already under construction or recently completed. But this is not a free gift. It's similarly conditional on 10% of the units being designated affordable. Those will form an advanced package of around 1,200 submarket priced tenancies coming online in the next 12 months. Last-minute negotiations also saw the addition of the pledge that all units affordable and market price will come with 5-year tenancies and a ban on no grounds evictions. Like the Help to Buy initiative, when viewed within the context of the wider housing crisis, this scheme is another micro measure. It has little or no relevance to headline concerns around home ownership affordability, low-income rental stress, and homelessness, but in combination with significant state tax changes enacted in recent years, it should help at the margin in establishing a new component in our rental market, one that, at least for moderate to high income tenants, will widen choice and improve quality. And if proponent boasts are valid, it could be a more customer-centric form of market rental than the traditional Australian norm. But the requirements for including affordable units in this new and as yet financially marginal form of development raises other possibilities. Why don't such obligations exist for the vast bulk of housing constructed as build to sell? A proposal for just such a framework, sometimes known as mandatory inclusionary zoning, is in development. Even if imposed at an extremely low rate, like 5% on homes built in high land value areas like Sydney, Melbourne, for example, this could generate a vastly greater affordable housing gain. The other point that is missed in all of this is that we have limited capacity for housing construction going on in Australia at the moment. Partly, of course, because the construction industry is pulled towards other government programs, which are actually paying higher margins than typical residential construction. So if you are going to see a rise in build to rent, there's going to be an offsetting fall in the number of other types of property being built. So in fact, this could end up not actually increasing the supply, but simply changing the type of property that's actually being built. And as a result of that, it could actually have a detrimental effect on housing supply. This, unfortunately, was not even considered when people were looking at the build-to-rent issue. And this is, for me, the bottom line. You cannot go piecemeal through these various initiatives. You need to have a more holistic view of how things are going to hang together, because the overhang of demand relative to supply of new property is getting more and more adverse. Of course, migration continues at a very fast pace, and the number of people who cannot afford to buy property or rent property continues to rise. So whilst this at the edges may sound not a particularly bad idea, I don't think that it really passed muster. And actually, all it is doing is putting an extra financialization layer on property. And what that means is more and more people will be thinking about investing in property for returns rather than seeing it as somewhere to live. To me, this is flying in the face of what needs to happen if we're really to solve the housing situation long term across Australia.
Now, if you're buying your home in Sydney's contentious market, you don't need to stand alone. This is the time you need to have Edwin Almeida from Ribbon Property Consultants standing alongside you. Buying a property is both challenging and adversarial. The vendor has a professional on their side. Emotions run high, price discovery and price transparency are hard to find, and then there's the wasted time and financial investments that you make. Edwin understands your needs, so why not engage a licensed professional to stand alongside you? With RPC, you know you have experience, knowledge, and master negotiators looking after your best interests. So shoot Ribbon an email at info@ribbonproperty.com.au. And if you use the promo code DFAWTW/Martin, you can get a 10% discount offer.
I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.